So I would like to introduce you to today's presenters, Butler, Newman, and Greg Long. Greg Long is a recognized thought leader in the area of performance improvement. His work is focused on improving organizational and individual performance through conceptualizing, designing, and developing strategic solutions for various communities. His programs have resulted in dramatic measurable increases in both business results and individual performance measures. Butler Newman is a recognized leader in the field of organizational performance, consulting with business and learning leaders to ensure top performance in roles critical to their organization's success. As Vice President of Performance Excellence, Butler leads the Organizational Excellence practice here at GP Strategies. Butler and Greg have worked together across multiple aspects of organizational improvement and have recently collaborated to produce their first book titled New Game Changers. I've actually known these guys for about 10 years now, which is hard to believe, so it's always a pleasure when I have the opportunity to work with you guys. So I welcome you and I welcome everyone who's joined us. And with that, Greg, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Thanks, Kayla. We appreciate that very much. Butler and I would like to add our thanks to you all for joining us, and hopefully we can address some topics today that are of interest to you and get some thought processes going. To start with, I guess what I'll do is tell you that we are really privileged. We get to study the nature of work as it's done today, but particularly work as it's done through the lens and from the perspective of top performers across multiple industries. You can see there on the slide some of the many different kinds of roles and organizations that we've looked at and worked with, and it's just been a real thrill and a treat to be able to do that. So with that, Butler, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started on the technology side of what we're talking about a little bit today.
Thanks, Greg, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you for a few minutes this afternoon. And I think for the people who would have been interested in a webinar like this curve probably makes a lot of sense. For some of us, and I'm dating myself now, I remember the advent, if you will, of each of these technologies into the human capital management space and the learning space, maybe even more particularly. And it's been quite a journey. And I think as we think about technology and the impact of technology, as we look at systems like this, mostly where we go is we think about how these technologies can make our job easier, either from an administrative standpoint or from reaching, the people in the organization, and more recently with the social media and more collaborative tools, how we can extend and promote an ongoing conversation within our organizations. So all of these technologies are fascinating in and of themselves, but again, they are really focused on improving efficiency as we perform the various tasks in the human capital management space. The latest technology to come on the scene to impact this space is the technology surrounding big data. And we don't even yet, I don't think, know the impact in terms of making our jobs easier or providing the kinds of information or business intelligence that will help us in terms of making human capital management type decisions. And that's an interesting question in itself, but it's really not where we're going to go in terms of our short time together. What we would like to talk about today is a different impact, if you will, in terms of technologies like big data, or we'll create a classification. We won't create it. IBM has really already created it with Watson. And if you think about technologies like Watson, that technology is going in places that are new to all of us. But as you really think about it in the workplace, or the impact of the people who make up our organizations, it's having an impact that is a little scary in some respects. just like every time new technology is rolled on the scene. And so the power of Watson to analyze big data is really, in many respects, reducing the value of procedural knowledge as it's held by humans. It's also reducing the value of technical knowledge. It's even, and this one, takes a little thinking on, it's starting to reduce the value of human reasoning in the workplace. And Greg, what's a quick example of that?
Well, a quick example from personal experience recently, I had to kind of reach into the medical profession to get a diagnosis done. And it was a kind of a situation where not very long ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago probably, it would have required going to a doctor, getting tests, doing all kinds of things in order to get the diagnostic results that I needed. Instead, I swung by the drugstore, a CVS in this case, stopped by the Minute Clinic, and a nurse practitioner with a computer was able to work down a fairly sophisticated diagnostic routine and come up with the answer in much less time and frankly, probably, according to some of the doctors I checked with, probably higher degree of accuracy and reliability. So this whole notion of technology impacting even reasoning skills is an interesting one that if it hasn't touched you, it certainly will soon. So be on the lookout for that.
So that, what does this really mean for us? And as we said before, when new technology advances happen, it has dramatic impacts on the workplace. This has historically been the case. If you look at the move from an agricultural age to an industrial age, technology was the key driver there. The advent of computers has taken us from the industrial age firmly into the information age. There are lots of names that are being pondered for where we're headed. Greg and I would like to add one to that list, and we're going to call that the human interaction age. Because it boils down to the question of, in the workplace, what value can we as humans contribute? Originally, it was labor. Next, it was just the ability to handle information and knowledge. Both of those have been taken over by technology. And as Greg has just alluded, reasoning now is starting to be impacted, or the value of humans in the workplace is being impacted by the systems like Watson. So that's scary. I know for me it's scary. But what's encouraging is on the other end of that, the thing that now is rising in value is the ability of humans to interact with one another. And if you think about truly successful people in the workplace, some interesting aspects of this start to come to light. And that's what we want to ponder a little more today in terms of this human interaction age, if you will. And this idea is really well described in the book by Jeff Colvin, Humans Are Underrated. Many of us who have joined today probably remember his first book in terms of talent being overrated. I think this new book was published in August. Really an excellent read, and I'd recommend it to be on everyone's reading list. But what does that practically mean? So now how we have tied this back into the work that we do and the observations that we're seeing. So Greg?
Sure. So let me take a quick shot at just a couple minutes worth of grounding this a little bit practically. Real world example, there's a retail allocation role. If any of you have ever wondered why you go to the store, any kind of a retail store, and they have the right goods for the right season at the right time of year, and so forth. This role is the one that's behind the scenes making that happen. They essentially analyze all the sales results, they project demand, they factor in all kinds of things like weather and seasons and trends and the calendar events and all kinds of things. And they develop and ship a plan for shipping goods to individual stores in order to meet that demand equation. Now, as part of their training, which is interesting, they spend an entire week typically on this demand equation and how to do all the complex calculations involved in this process. And then when we went and looked at top performers, we found that there is a significant variation between top and average performers in the role, the people actually doing the job, in terms of their ability to predict accurately and get the right goods in the right stores at the right time to meet the simple laws of supply and demand. So when we studied that, we were trying to figure out what is it that makes that difference between top and average performers. And what we found is, to our surprise, frankly, top performers did not use that equation that they spent so much time learning. Instead, they had developed their own shorthand formula and then combined that with some secret ingredients that really enabled them to excel at their jobs. And that secret ingredient in that particular role is very similar to what we saw in many other roles, and it turned out to be kind of deceptively simple to understand and frustratingly complex to integrate into our people strategies. So what we found, and we'll take a step back here, if you go to the next slide, Butler, is there's two consistent observations that we've seen in that role and across all the roles that we've looked at. To start with, every role has top performers who are doing a great job. And secondly, every role also has the vast majority of people in the 60, 65, 70% range of folks who are really working hard to do a good job, but for some reason they're just not achieving the same kind of results. And what we've found is that that top performer set of results is the design point for what we're trying to understand and accomplish. And so when we look at this design point, the whole idea here is that those top performers are doing something different. They're looking at different things, they're focused on different things, and those different things fall into this notion of the human interaction era that we're talking about. So it's a fascinating progression where we've changed in terms of the nature of work now from an era where Henry Ford was said to have said, why is it that every time I ask for a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached? I just want people to do the labor. The labor is all that really matters. To an observation from Colvin in the book that Butler mentioned, organizations can't even begin to get better until acknowledging that human interaction skills are the key to competitive advantage. And we completely and totally agree with Colvin. The secret ingredient that the allocation analyst role used all had to do with human interaction skills. So, Butler, talk a little bit about how we look at roles now and what we're starting to see through these observations across different types of roles.
Sure, Greg, thanks. So one of the things that we have done is taken a step back and looked at, I think Greg mentioned at the beginning, the nature and the number of roles that we've had the privilege to look at top performers in. So we have started to take a look now across different roles. And there's some interesting data and insight from that view. And it's represented in this chart on the left. So if we think about the top performers, those are the people who land in the upper right-hand corner. But how they get there is interesting, because what they end up doing is two things, and they do both of these very well. One is when they think about task, they are very purposeful about the task. and so they get they have motion. They can check things off their list, and they accomplish procedures and logic, etc. But they have integrated the vertical axis in their way of thinking in terms of executing on the job. They have integrated skillful human interactions. And so it's this combination and this integration that is what we have, I guess, landed on in terms of the thing that really drives top performance in almost any role. And if you think about the two components, you have to be careful because alone they can help, but it's the integration that matters. So if it's just skillful human interaction, you end up in what this quadrant that we call hopeful frustration. People feel good, there's lots of discussion, but there's not a lot of movement. If you are only good on the purposeful task, you can end up in the lower right quadrant where what we would call task blindness. In other words, sometimes this can be referred to as a checkbox type of culture, if you will. Hey, we're going to get it done. Was the intent of whatever list we were checking off accomplished? Doesn't really matter. We got it done. We got it checked off. And so, again, it's the integration that top performers innately bring together around interacting with those around them in not superficial ways, but in very skillfully to help them produce the outcomes that really matter and add value for their organization. And we have some, Greg, you want to talk about some of the examples?
Well, the one I'll mention is the classic one that took us by surprise, frankly, and that's an auditor role for a large global organization. And if you think about auditors, they're the classic introvert job. It's the perfect job for an introvert. They run the numbers, they write the report, they hand off the report, they don't really have to deal with people. But what we found was that the top auditors, again, the ones who were doing the best job, that were finding things that were making the biggest impact to the business, didn't view the report as the end of the job. They viewed the report as the beginning of a conversation with stakeholders. And that's that continuously aligned stakeholder example at the top of the list, where they were working day to day with the folks who were running the businesses they were auditing in order to figure out how to best take these audit results and drive business impact, protect the business, protect shareholders, all the things that you want an auditor to do. They viewed this as the beginning of the conversation, not just the task. So yes, they had to do the task well, but they also had to do the skillful human interactions well in addition to that. So good example of what Butler's talking about.
Thanks, Greg. So, our quick time together is really coming to a close here. So if there were 3 takeaways we would suggest for you is, number one, in terms of thinking about how to apply this integration, if you will, and task and skillful human interaction, context is key. It does matter the role you're in, the culture of your organization, and how you as an individual decide what your network is going to look like. Number 2, the cross product is a top performer, and top performers, they purposefully execute and they integrate skillful human interactions. And number 3 is our finding in surveying is there's really no it factor. Almost every outcome that we attribute to top performers can be taught to others. Now, some will naturally will progress more naturally and quicker, but all the outcomes really can be taught, and others can be equipped to perform those outcomes. So I think that wraps up our time together. Kayla, are there questions?
Yep, there's a few questions have come in so far, but just as a reminder to everyone, If you do have a question for Butler or Greg at this time, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module. We covered a lot in 20 minutes, which is a very short amount of time, but we hope that you walked away with some key insights to get you thinking. There's obviously more information to discuss, so we do encourage that you continue the conversation with Butler and Greg beyond today's session. You can see their contact information is available in this slide deck, and we will send everyone a link to a follow-up blog post where they'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways as well as any questions that we get asked. So I'd also like to remind you that the recording and slides will be sent to the email address you provided as well. I know a few questions came in around that. So I will go ahead and get to these questions, and we'll take a few minutes to get to those. So the first one is, do all jobs have human, a couple came in as I was reading that. Do all jobs have human interaction skills, or are there some with just task completion?
Greg, you want to handle that one?
It's an interesting question because I guess jobs are progressing, work is changing, as we mentioned, and fewer jobs that we run across anyway, the ones that are really critical to the success of an organization, could be classified as purely task-oriented jobs. Increasingly, the higher value jobs that organizations are looking to require both sets of skills, both task interaction and human interaction, or task completion and human interaction. So I think the era of just labor-only jobs is quickly coming to a close if it hasn't already. Butler, you want to add anything?
No, I think that's a good start on that one. Other questions we want to try to tackle, Kayla?
Yep. So we've got so how would organizations actually use this information? Do you have any actual action items that you would recommend?
Well, I think we can all contribute to that question, but what we're seeing is that and Greg and my background both are in learning and working mostly with learning organizations, where the focus has been for the last 20 or 25 years on how do we get knowledge out from central repositories to the workplace. I think as the value of that knowledge starts to decrease because it is so easily disseminated through technology and other means, the question then the learning organization and the entire human capital management strategy needs to address is how do we and what do we do to help the people who are running our business succeed. And a lot more energy and focus than has been historically true needs to be dedicated to this topic of skillful human interaction. And by this, we're not talking about communication. And social media probably plays a role in it, but interaction at the human level, and how do you really get there to have the kinds of meaningful conversations that can move people and move organizations at the degree and the level that are going to be necessary to succeed.
So the next question actually kind of ties into what you were actually just saying, and you can always elaborate on it more if you want to, and also address in the blog post if you want to think on it more, but how would you move people from a task environment to a human interaction environment?
Wow, that's a great question. What I would start with is a true understanding of the work that people are doing. And we would argue strongly that that would require an outcome map, a list of the outcomes that individuals need to produce consistently in order to excel at their jobs, and then take a critical look at those outcomes and see what the two components are, what the task component and what the skillful human interaction component of those jobs are. Because what you'll find is that almost all of those outcomes that you identify will have both. And then you can take a look back at your people strategy and say, how well am I doing at equipping folks on each of these axes? Am I overemphasizing the task side? Am I underemphasizing the task side? What about the interaction side? how am I specifically addressing those, and trying not to unbalance either one of those. So the 3 steps I would offer is 1, map the outcomes of the job, 2, do a critical evaluation of those outcomes and look for both components, and then 3, take a look backwards and say what's going on with our equipping strategies and how well are we equipping people in order to succeed at both of those axes.
And through all of that, keep in mind the context and the context that individual roles are operating in is one of the key drivers to both understanding and performing on both axes.
Great point.
Yep. Great. Thanks, guys. I think that pretty much wraps up all the questions that have come in. So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping things up. I am going to leave the WebEx up just for a few minutes. So if you do have any additional questions, we won't be answering them on this call. But what I can do is I'll make sure to send them over to Butler and Greg so they can address them in the follow-up blog post. So if you do have any more questions, send those our way. Thanks again to today's speakers, Butler Newman and Greg Long. It's always great to work with you. And thanks to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for our next webinar. This will be on a practical approach for achieving operational excellence. This will be on March 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So for GP Strategies, I'm Kayla Ross, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thanks, Kayla.